middle. So awkward.
Yeah. No, good, good. Yeah. All right. Oh gosh, that's rather loud. Thank you, everyone, for joining. For those of us online, and thank you to WEGIO, the World Green Economy Organization, for allowing us to present this very important topic on IREC, the International Renewable Energy Certificate. Thank you also to my esteemed panelists and guests. I'll be introducing them very shortly to talk about their regional perspectives on IREC. Bit of an introduction to myself. My name is Travis Caddy, Business Development Director at Evident. We are a co-founder of the... We are the co-founder of IREC, International Renewable Energy Certificate. For those of us who aren't familiar with IREC as a mechanism, I'll happily provide some context to renewable energy certificates and how these markets developed. So in the late 1990s, in Europe and North America, there was a desire from consumers of electricity to be able to differentiate where their electricity came from. And as we all know, electricity, it's a homogeneous product, so as a consumer, you don't know whether you're consuming green or gray electrons. There's no such thing as a green or a gray electron. So renewable energy tracking systems were developed in order for consumers to be able to differentiate from where their energy came from. Specifically, they wanted to make claims around we're powered by solar, we're powered by wind, we're powered by renewables, and the guarantee of origin market was developed in Europe and various different REC mechanisms in North America. And based off the best practice and expertise that was developed, we developed IREC in order to standardize the global implementation of REC systems. And that has got us to where we are today. This map gives you a sense of the global footprint of IREC. We are now in over 60 countries worldwide, predominantly across emerging markets and the global south, but we also operate in Australia. And our thesis for market development has been global standardization with local implementation. We have very much wanted to give national governments, regional governments, the opportunity to develop these markets in a way that is best suited to them, their local regulation, and what better way to maybe kick us off than turning to Maria Aljishi, who is representative of the CDM-DNA. They are our representative local issuer in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Maria, I'll just turn to you very quickly. Maybe if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the role of DNA before we kick into your role specifically within IREC.
Thank you very much, Travis, and I appreciate the invitation. So my name is Maria Aljishi. I work in the Clean Development Mechanism Designated National Authority, but we refer to it as the DNA, so the Designated National Authority. It is an authority that was originally established to be a focal point for the UNFCCC CDM, hence the name. But since its establishment, we have expanded the scope of our work to include Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, the preparation of nationally determined contributions, the preparation of GAG inventory reports, all of the BTRs, all of the domestic market mandates sit within the DNA, which serves as it's an independent body within the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, governed by a committee of 26 members that span private sector, government, semi-government, covering more than 90% of our emissions profiles. So that's a little bit about me and what I do there. I'm Assistant Secretary General to all of the technical affairs So all of the above falls under the scope of my work, and it's been quite enjoyable.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Sticking with you, so it sounds like the initial focus being predominantly carbon markets and the implementation of Article 6, but also the VCM. Can you tell us a little bit about your intentions for strengthening the IREC market locally, what your plans are there, what the current state is, and yeah, maybe just elaborate a bit on what the future looks like?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, renewable energy certificates are a way to track the energy attribute of the renewables, right? And when we looked at our carbon market, even within Article 6, we realized that we cannot just allow for the change of certificates quantified in CO2 or CO2 equivalent, because that would automatically mean that your renewable energy certificates are double counted under such a system, right? And so within Article 6 itself, there lives several paragraphs that allow for something called a non-GHG metric accounting. And so that was fit for purpose there for the attribute certificates that would be tracking things that are associated with an emission reduction that may not be tracked necessarily in CO2 equivalent, but would be tracked in something else like the 1 megawatt of REC. And so when that was agreed under Article 6 Rulebook of Paris Agreement and we came into the domestic implementation portion, our domestic voluntary market, which we call GCOM, already accounts for the non-GHG element. And so we are looking to integrate renewable energy certificates with the evident code for the issuance of RECs that would play a role in our carbon market so that we have a very unified, holistic, transparent approach to how these certificates are being exchanged, who is claiming them, and we can guarantee that the claim of that renewable energy from that certificate within our system does not also have an associated CO2 equivalent claim that's being done by someone else, that the ownership of that certificate represents the ownership of both, and that way we are designing something that is higher integrity than perhaps would have happened if it had been more fragmented within our domestic market.
Well, thank you for stepping into the market and playing quite an important role. That's really the key, one of the key principles around RECs. It's to avoid double counting. So ensuring that, you know, if it's a megawatt hour, it's not being claimed by two beneficiaries, and that's why we have registries. They are the single source of truth, and yeah, play a key role. Dr. Wayne Chen, I'm going to turn to you now. Maybe you can give a little bit of an introduction to yourself as well, the organization that you work for, and then I'll ask some deeper dive questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Travis, for this opportunity, of course, to speak at your platform. And a bit about my background. Actually, for the past 20 years, I was actually largely in the energy sector. I served the Ministry of Energy, promoting especially renewable energy. And specifically in the year 2018, when I was serving the government agency to implement the feed-in tariff and other renewable energy program, we were the first in Malaysia to actually carry out the REX awareness workshop. It was the first time in 2018. So fast forward, I was 2 years in the oil and gas sector as well, helping them with the energy transition plan. But 3 years, Bursa Malaysia, which is the Malaysia's national exchange, they invited me to head the carbon market. And I'm very pleased to say that today Bursa operates the Bursa Carbon Exchange, which is the world's first Sharia compliant exchange at the end of 2022. But carbon market, as Maria would have known very well, it's been a very muted market in Malaysia, given that it's still very nascent. So in the year 2024, which is last year, we actually signed up with IRAC, or rather iTrack Foundation, and we were the first trading platform in Malaysia to receive the accreditation. So today we trade both carbon credits and REX for Bursa Malaysia. So I think maybe this is where I can stop for now. Thank you.
Great, thank you. That's right. So we have a very much an open framework, a non-proprietary model that allows for other service providers such as Burson to come in, connect with the registry via API, and innovate on top of what we're currently doing. So, Dr. Waney, congratulations on your ASEAN chairship, I guess you could say, this year. I believe there was an enhanced MOU around the power grid. How do you think that is going to help accelerate the adoption of REX within Southeast Asia?
Yes, actually, the ASEAN Power Grid has a history backdated to 1997 during the ASEAN Vision 2020. So it is something that has been in the making for over 2 decades. But this year is a very special year because, as you've mentioned, Malaysia actually helms as chairmanship of the ASEAN. So it has been really an extremely very busy time for Malaysia as we host a different ASEAN meeting. But this year, we also signed the enhanced MOU to increase the greater interoperability among the electricity or the cross-border trade within the ASEAN region. I think within the ASEAN region, each country is well endowed with different renewable resources. Like, for example, Malaysia in the Borneo Island, we have very rich hydro, just like what Brazil has presented just now. And of course, we do have very rich solar as well. Solar technical potential is around 269 gigawatt. So that alone is very huge. And Malaysia, we do have a national energy transition plan to have 70% of renewable energy in our installed capacity mix by 2050. So therefore, having this ASEAN power grid, the whole idea is to improve the interoperability, especially now integrating the messaging of sustainability and actually upscale renewable energies to distribute it more evenly around the ASEAN region. So under this particular enhanced MOU, they will set up 3 technical task force. One to look into harmonizing the policy. Second is technical harmonizing, especially with regards to the different grid codes. And thirdly is on the commercial harmonizing. And very important, one of the side things that came out of it is the development of the ASEAN REX framework by 2027 that will actually address a bigger and a more interoperable REX market. I think the REX market today suffers same as what carbon market is suffering, different pricing. So therefore, hopefully by the end of 2027 or earlier, we can see a much more harmonized and integrated REX platform. I think on this note, we have to give some credit to Singapore because Singapore last month signed up together, I believe, with the iTrack to actually develop the cross-border kind of like a framework that is applicable to Southeast Asia. So hopefully with that particular platform, I think it's trying to address which registries would be suitable and how do the actual export of electricity versus the bundle racks that goes with it, and also the accounting side, especially on the residual emissions of the grid. So hopefully if we can harmonize this, then corporate greater confidence to procure more of the renewable energy certificate for the scope 2 requirements.
Yeah, lots to unpack there. So, I mean, interoperability really is about unlocking demand right across ASEAN, Singapore being a key demand center, I guess. Can you give us some more of a perspective as well as the broader market challenges and opportunities for IREC across Southeast Asia, but also Malaysia?
Yeah, so actually it's quite ironic that the reason why we moved into REX in 2024 was because carbon market was really quite muted. And in Malaysia, the REX market is a lot more matured compared to the REX market. But starting from this year, we do notice that even the REX market has actually been rather muted as well. And part of the reason we found out from discussing with our regional peers and traders is for a few reasons. Firstly, that there is a move towards the take up of the bundled racks. They will very much prefer bundled racks rather than the unbundled racks. And secondly, if you look at the number of devices that are registered actually with IREC alone, that have actually increased tremendously. So therefore, the supply actually outweighs the demand, and it did not really help that Trump's policy actually made some of the companies shy away from being forthright in declaring the use of RECs for their Scope 2 emissions. And I think this will be some of the reasons why, if you take a lessons from the carbon market, we do need a compliance market to ensure that there is some stability. Like in electricity, you have a base load demand to actually create that kind of support. And I think in the previous session, they were actually discussing that if you do not have a healthy demand, then you will not see a healthy investment. And the minute there is no, the investment will be so costly if the banks do not see that there is a good off-taker for it. That could be applicable to both the energy, both the and the REX market. I think we need to start off a regulated market before pivoting to a voluntary market. So I'm going to just stop there.
Perfect. And maybe turning to you, Maria, then, similar question. You're obviously taking a deep dive into the IREC market now, how it's currently structured. What do you think are some of the opportunities as you look to build out the market in potentially a more regulated way or quasi-compliance?
So for us, the biggest challenge is that the market is demanding renewable energy certificates because they've made voluntary commitments for 100% renewable claims on some of their products. Some have voluntary commitments for the percent of renewables that they use compared to their overall energy use. And so attempting to reconcile the different claims that different entities and different sides want to make when it comes to their use of renewable energy certificates and what that means for those who may not have access to those certificates has been something that we have been reconciling with. Our market for now remains voluntary, though we are looking at a compliance market. Generally, that would encompass emissions. So it would be a compliance market that could potentially include renewable energy certificate, could potentially just look at the CO2 equivalent certificates, but we're looking at what that could look like for the kingdom with a pilot targeted in years. But even with that said, when it came to the renewable energy certificates, one of the challenges we were having was in terms of pricing, and then the regional price of certificates is there is no regional price of certificates. And then looking at different benchmarks around the world, we found that there was such a huge fluctuation in what those prices were. But it does not necessarily mean that we were comparing apples to apples because the use of the certificate, even within itself, is quite different depending on how different countries and national contexts choose to utilize it. And so we ended up having to do a lot of work to propose a framework that is somewhat regulated for the voluntary market that exists that would ensure consistent access and equitable access for all of the players in the market to the certificates that are available because so far to my knowledge no grid in the world runs on 100% renewable energy, and so everybody who wants to claim 100% may not be able to do so. And so what does that mean? What does that look like? Who gets access? What do we do with the excess? And so we have a renewable energy certificate allocation framework actually in Kingdom that would allocate the certificates based on national priorities, strategies, decarbonization, um, whether or not the different players are there for strategic diversification of the economy, if there occurs for our economic growth. It gives them different rankings within the module that we have, and then the certificates are allocated accordingly. And any excess certificates would go to an auction, though we do not expect excess certificates in the next couple of years because the market does have quite high demand. And we looked at different ways to also stabilize the price. So we do have quite a regulated framework for the voluntary market when it comes to the renewable energy certificates, because surprisingly, though the carbon market was there first, we had higher demand from our private sector players and our semi-government players for the renewable energy certificates than anything else. And we do have a few mega and giga projects in Kingdom who are also looking at the renewable energy certificates for their scope too. So it's a combination of all of the above.
Very exciting times. Can you give us a sense of when and how this allocation framework will be implemented? Will it be a pilot phase, or what's the thinking there?
Well, we're undergoing our internal processes, but it could be as soon as the end of the year. It could be as soon as next year. It's really up to decision makers higher than myself at this point in time.
And you mentioned around the sort of emissions framework as well. Is that suggesting that there could be an interplay between a cap and trade and the REC framework, or?
Yes, we're actually looking into that, and I think you had on your map earlier how Australia has integrated renewable energy certificates as, correct me if I'm mistaken, but
Below base load.
below the base load, and if it's higher than the base load, then it goes into the system that they have that's compliance, right? We're kind of looking at it how to do the opposite, right? So if we're looking at renewable energy within a system that's going to have potentially a cap and trade, though that's not firm yet, we're still exploring all of our options, but let's go with the cap and trade assumption. If we are to cap emissions of certain sectors or certain players in our markets, and then not accordingly integrate the renewable energy certificate framework, it would make it really difficult for them to have the claim on renewable electron that is in the grid to be able to actually meet the cap on their emissions that we have put in place, because we have policies and regulations domestically in place for how much captive renewable energy generation they can have, and that is in order to balance the load on the national grid. Right? So if we don't integrate renewable energy certificates into our emission compliance system, I think that would be a misjudgment on our part, but that's just my personal opinion. And we're looking into how would that work. It's difficult because we're kind of merging two things that are different but similar, but we're attempting to do it.
And Dr. Wainee, so in terms of how the market is structured in Malaysia, you mentioned that it's already predominantly voluntary. Is there some sense, as cross-border is gathering pace, that some kind of quasi-compliant market could be developed in the future, or?
If you're referring to REX at the moment, there has not been any consideration yet for a, like what you say, a compliance REX market. But what Malaysia is looking at carbon tax, and within a few years, there is a domestic emission trading and ETS mechanism. But since we are on the conversation of a cross-border, I just wanted to take this opportunity to share, and I also would love to get Maria's view on this, because I think certain jurisdictions or certain countries were very concerned that if we export renewable energy, then it could hurt our NDC achievement. I believe that unless you authorize your emissions reduction to the buyer country, if you do not do that, just a mere export of the renewable electricity actually should benefit the whole country and not jeopardize our NDC. And I felt that this particular reasoning is not very well understood by the electricity sector, because the electricity ministry is different from the environment ministry. So there is always this concern that we should protect our renewable energy and keep it domicile, and not just in case we do not achieve enough emissions reduction for our NDC. But I would really have loved to hear your views on this, Maria, if you don't mind.
Thank you. If you don't mind, we're going to have a little chat on our
Yeah,
own
go
over
for
here. So I think you are correct that the export of the electron itself to a different country as a renewable energy is not going to hurt the domestic NDC unless it's authorized. But I think also the reason why the other country would engage in such a connection is because they would want the claim to the renewable energy, right? And so different countries have different challenges when it comes to introducing renewables into their grid. Some of it is literally the lack of space for the renewable energy to happen. And so, yes, you keep it in your NDC unless you authorize it for export, but also I would assume that the country that's purchasing that electricity at some point in time will turn around and say, wait a minute, I want this also for my NDC, so why would I pay X country for electricity coming into my grid without the claim to that renewable energy when perhaps my other neighbor may also give me the renewable energy alongside the claim for the electricity. And for us, we're really we have the same similar challenges, I think, because we are looking at potential grid connections regionally, and we are looking at the implications of what would that mean for the NDC, what would that mean for the capacities that we're introducing, because then those capacities would have to be additional to our ambition of NDC for them to be exported. What would it look like if they weren't additional, and how could that be made up in our NDC? All of that is uh, things that go around in my mind because, like I mentioned, one blessing is that we don't have the fragmentation of Ministry of Energy versus Ministry of Environment or anything like that when it comes to this mandate, because it sits with us in the DNA, and both of those ministries are members of our committee and their input is taken into consideration. And so we oftentimes have collective, cohesive decisions on what it is that we're doing, which is quite nice.
Yeah, I think with cross-border, obviously it brings a huge amount of opportunity, particularly for Southeast Asia, but it also does potentially bring challenges in terms of, is there an interaction with the country's NDCs? And thank you, Maria, for your input. Obviously, who could be better placed to answer that question, given your various roles within Article 6? Is a regional EAC rec market something that the kingdom has looked at with other neighbouring states, or is the focus primarily on driving domestic demand?
We have considered it. However, well, not however, but we have considered it, and it is very difficult to have a conversation about what a regional market would look like when you don't have clarity on what you want to do domestically. And so we've been working to build up that clarity in order for us to be able to hopefully engage in that conversation in the future. Some of our neighbors have also taken quite um, beautiful strides to build up their own internal capacities as well, which I believe would make the conversation easier when it occurs. And I'm really looking forward to that phase, because then perhaps we would have more answers than questions. But I think right now, for both the renewable energy certificate space as well as the carbon market space, which in my mind is kind of the same, there are more questions than answers in terms of the interactions, and the global fragmentation is challenging. Though I do want to touch, if you allow me, on cross-border connections or cross-border adjustments, because we have seen also an increase in carbon border adjustment mechanisms, right? And they are putting out standards for what they expect their imported products to be able to prove when it comes to renewable energy claims. And one of the challenges that we're struggling with is that the standards are being set forth are really being done in a way that is extremely constrained and that does not recognize that what I'm doing in Saudi may be different from what Malaysia is doing, but both have merit and both are up to a certain standard of the best that we can do domestically. In fact, that I would argue that what we're doing at least exceeds the standards that are being put out, but because they're not included in those standards, they're automatically being disqualified, which is ironically pushing a lot of pressure on us to undo the regulations that we have put in place to result in a more fragmented renewable energy certificate market in Kingdom rather than encouraging that development path that we're on. And so just wanted to touch on that as well, that is one of the challenges that we're having with carbon border adjustment mechanisms as well.
Yeah. Dr. Rainey, I think you have a follow-up point on CBAM maybe or something else.
Yeah, actually, it's not on CBAM, but just to follow on about Maria about the standards, that is actually causing more fragmentation than anything. This is with regards to the GHG protocol and the Scope 2 reporting, whereby they are actually going through consultation to look into two important features. One is to actually advocate for an hourly kind of like a matching in terms of the REX consumption. And secondly is on proximity, whereby they actually advocated for the use of RECs only within the same grid jurisdiction.